The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training grounds of Fort Braxton. Sarah Martinez adjusted the strap of her rifle bag and walked toward the shooting range with steady steps. At 24 years old, she had already earned respect among her fellow soldiers, but today would test everything she had learned. The base buzzed with unusual activity. Word had spread quickly through the barracks about the challenge that awaited them. Enemy snipers had been picking off Allied forces with deadly precision for months. These weren't ordinary shooters. They were ghost-like figures who struck from impossible distances and vanished without a trace. Military intelligence estimated at least 12 highly skilled marksmen were operating in the region, and traditional counter-sniper tactics had failed repeatedly. Sarah had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, where her grandfather taught her to hunt before she could properly hold a rifle. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had shown her the discipline and patience required for long-range shooting. By age 16, she could hit a target at 800 yards with iron sights. When she enlisted in the Army 3 years later, her instructors quickly recognized her exceptional talent. The briefing room filled with tension as Colonel Williams outlined the situation. Satellite images showed the enemy positions scattered across a 20-mile stretch of rocky terrain. Each sniper nest was expertly concealed and positioned to provide maximum coverage while remaining nearly invisible to reconnaissance aircraft. Previous attempts to eliminate these threats had resulted in the loss of 6 specialized units and countless missed opportunities. "These shooters are professionals," Colonel Williams explained, pointing to marks on a tactical map. "They've been trained by the best and equipped with state-of-the-art weapons. Our boys have been trying for 3 months to take them down, and we've barely scratched the surface." Sarah studied the terrain photographs carefully. The enemy had chosen their positions with masterful precision. Rocky outcroppings that provided natural camouflage, elevated positions with multiple escape routes, and sight lines that covered all major approach paths. Each location offered the perfect balance of concealment and tactical advantage. The room fell silent when Colonel Williams announced the new strategy. Rather than sending large units that could be easily detected, they would deploy individual snipers to hunt their counterparts. It was dangerous work that required exceptional skill, nerves of steel, and the ability to think like the enemy. "We need volunteers," the colonel said, his eyes scanning the assembled soldiers. "This isn't a mission for everyone. You'll be operating alone, deep in hostile territory, against opponents who know the terrain better than we do." Sarah's hand shot up immediately. Several other snipers followed suit, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. They understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Hunting professional killers who had already proven their superiority against conventional forces. The selection process began immediately. Each volunteer underwent rigorous testing that pushed their skills to the absolute limit. They fired at targets positioned at extreme ranges under various weather conditions. They demonstrated their ability to remain motionless for hours while maintaining perfect awareness of their surroundings. They solved complex ballistic calculations under pressure and proved they could operate advanced surveillance equipment. Sarah excelled in every category. Her shooting scores consistently exceeded those of candidates with years more experience. During the endurance tests, she remained perfectly still for 6 hours straight while tracking simulated targets through her scope. When other candidates struggled with equipment malfunctions, she quickly diagnosed and resolved technical problems that would have ended their missions. But the real test came during the psychological evaluation. Military psychologists probed each candidate's ability to handle extreme isolation, make life-or-death decisions without support, and maintain focus under the crushing pressure of knowing that a single mistake could mean death. Many excellent shooters were eliminated at this stage. Their technical skills were outstanding, but they lacked the mental fortitude required for this type of mission. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the lead psychologist, was particularly impressed with Sarah's responses during the evaluation. When asked how she would handle killing another human being, Sarah answered honestly about the weight of such responsibility while demonstrating her understanding that hesitation could cost lives. Her responses showed maturity beyond her years and a clear grasp of the moral complexity inherent in warfare. Most candidates either show too much enthusiasm for violence or too much reluctance to use necessary force. Dr. Hayes explained to Colonel Williams after the evaluations concluded. Martinez shows the perfect balance. She understands the gravity of taking a life while maintaining the resolve to do what's necessary to protect others. The final selection came down to 3 candidates: Sarah, Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson with 8 years of sniper experience, and Sergeant First Class David Park, who had earned commendations for his work in urban combat scenarios. Each possessed exceptional skills, but they would only send one person for this critical mission. The deciding factor came during a realistic simulation exercise. The candidates were placed in a mock environment that replicated the enemy terrain as closely as possible. They had to locate and eliminate 3 hidden targets while avoiding detection by roving patrols. The exercise tested not only their shooting ability but also their tactical thinking, fieldcraft, and ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Thompson, despite his experience, was detected by a patrol during his approach to the second target. His years of training in different environments hadn't prepared him for this specific type of terrain and enemy behavior. Park successfully eliminated 2 targets, but struggled with the extreme range required for the third shot. Missing by inches after calculating wind conditions incorrectly, Sarah approached the exercise differently. Instead of rushing to engage the targets, she spent the first 2 hours studying the patrol patterns and environmental conditions. She noted how the wind patterns changed throughout the day, identified the blind spots in the enemy surveillance network, and planned her movements to take advantage of natural cover. Her first shot eliminated the target at 1,200 yards, during a brief moment when wind conditions were perfect. She immediately relocated to a position that gave her a better angle on the second target, while remaining completely invisible to the searching patrols. The second elimination came after a patient wait of 90 minutes. She held fire until the target moved into the perfect position, then took the shot during the exact moment when a passing cloud provided optimal lighting conditions. The third target proved most challenging. It was positioned 1,400 yards away, with limited approach routes and heavy patrol coverage. Sarah realized that a conventional approach would likely result in detection and failure. Instead, she circled wide around the entire exercise area, approaching from an unexpected direction that allowed her to take the shot from an elevated position that no one had considered. When the simulation ended, the evaluators were stunned. Sarah had not only eliminated all 3 targets but had done so without being detected even once. Her approach demonstrated creativity, patience, and technical skill that impressed even the most experienced military professionals present. Colonel Williams made his decision immediately. Sarah would deploy as a single-person hunter-killer team with one mission: eliminate the enemy snipers who had been terrorizing Allied forces for months. The briefing for her specific mission would begin the following morning. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, cleaning her rifle and reviewing everything she knew about the enemy positions. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow she would begin the most dangerous mission of her military career, facing opponents who had already proven their deadly effectiveness against seasoned soldiers. She thought about her grandfather's lessons in the Colorado mountains, remembering his words about patience, respect for the weapon, and the importance of understanding your environment completely before taking action. Those early morning hunts had taught her that success came not from rushing toward the target, but from becoming part of the landscape itself. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger brother, asking about her latest assignment. She couldn't tell him the specifics, but she texted back that she was fine and would call him when she could. Some missions required complete focus, and personal distractions could prove fatal. The night passed slowly. Sarah reviewed satellite images, studied weather patterns, and memorized every detail of the terrain maps. She cleaned her equipment repeatedly and ran through various scenarios in her mind. By dawn, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The mission briefing began at 0600 hours. Intelligence officers provided the latest information about enemy movements, potential extraction routes, and communication protocols. Sarah would be completely on her own once she entered the operational area. No backup, no immediate support, and no room for error. As the briefing concluded, Colonel Williams pulled her aside for a final conversation. "Martinez, I want you to understand something. This mission is voluntary, and you can still back out if you have any doubts. Once you're out there, we can't help you if things go wrong. Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "Sir, I understand the risks. Those enemy snipers have been killing our people for months, and conventional tactics haven't worked. Someone needs to stop them, and I believe I can do it." The colonel nodded slowly. He had seen many confident soldiers over the years, but something about Sarah's quiet determination convinced him that she truly understood what lay ahead. She wasn't eager for glory or motivated by reckless bravery. She was a professional who understood her capabilities and was willing to use them for the greater good. Final preparations took most of the day. Sarah's rifle was modified with the latest optical equipment and fitted with a suppressor that would reduce muzzle, flash, and sound signature. She selected ammunition specifically designed for extreme long-range accuracy and tested every round to ensure consistency. Her gear was carefully chosen to provide maximum capability while maintaining the mobility necessary for a solo mission. The insertion would take place the following night. A helicopter would drop her at a location 15 miles from the first suspected sniper position, and from that point forward, she would be entirely dependent on her own skills and preparation. As the sun set over Fort Braxton, Sarah completed her final equipment checks and prepared for what would become the most challenging test of her life. Tomorrow night, she would enter hostile territory to face enemies who had already proven their superiority against conventional forces. The mission would require every skill she had learned and push her abilities to the absolute limit. But Sarah Martinez had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. The enemy snipers had dominated the battlefield for months, believing themselves untouchable and unstoppable. Tomorrow, they would discover just how wrong they had been. The helicopter's rotors cut through the darkness as it approached the drop zone. Sarah Martinez sat in complete silence. Her mind focused on the mission ahead. The aircraft flew without lights, using terrain-following radar to maintain altitude while avoiding enemy detection systems. Through her night vision goggles, she could see the rocky landscape rushing past below. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. 2 minutes to drop zone, Martinez. Weather conditions are optimal. Clear skies. Light winds from the northwest. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her custom rifle was secured in its protective case, and her pack contained enough supplies for 7 days of independent operation. She had memorized every detail of the insertion point and planned her initial route to avoid known patrol areas. The enemy had no idea she was coming. The helicopter touched down briefly in a small clearing surrounded by dense brush. Sarah jumped out and immediately moved toward cover while the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the night. Within seconds, the sound of rotors faded completely, leaving her alone in hostile territory with nothing but her skills and equipment. She remained motionless for 30 minutes, listening to the sounds of the night and allowing her senses to adapt to the new environment. Night birds called from the trees, and small animals moved through the underbrush. But she detected no signs of human presence in the immediate area. The intelligence reports had been accurate. This location was far enough from enemy positions to provide a safe starting point. Moving carefully through the darkness, Sarah began her approach toward the first suspected sniper position. She had studied satellite images and topographical maps until she could visualize every rock and tree, but experiencing the terrain firsthand revealed details that no photograph could capture. The ground was harder than expected, with loose stones that could betray her position if she stepped carelessly. Her progress was deliberately slow. Military doctrine emphasized speed and aggressive movement. But hunting enemy snipers required different tactics. These opponents were patient, observant, and deadly accurate. They had survived months of conventional military operations by being smarter and more careful than their enemies. Sarah understood that rushing would only get her killed. As dawn approached, she selected a hide site in a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment while offering good observation of the surrounding area. She carefully arranged natural materials to break up her outline and settled in to study the terrain ahead. The first enemy position was estimated to be approximately 2 miles away, but she needed to confirm its exact location before making any moves. Through her scope, Sarah began a systematic examination of every possible hiding spot within range. The enemy sniper had chosen his position well. a rocky outcropping that commanded excellent fields of fire, while remaining nearly invisible from most angles. But Sarah had learned to think like her prey, and she knew that even the best concealment had weaknesses. After 4 hours of patient observation, she detected the first sign of her target. A glint of reflected sunlight lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to reveal the sniper's position. The enemy was hidden among the rocks approximately 1,800 yards away, positioned to cover the main approach routes that conventional forces had been using. Sarah spent the rest of the day studying her target's behavior patterns. The enemy sniper was disciplined and professional, scanning his assigned sectors methodically and maintaining excellent camouflage discipline. But everyone had habits, and Sarah was looking for the tiny details that would give her the advantage she needed. The breakthrough came late in the afternoon. The enemy sniper shifted position slightly to track a bird that had landed nearby, and for just a moment, Sarah could see the outline of his rifle barrel through her scope. More importantly, she could see exactly where he was looking and identify the blind spot in his coverage that would allow her to move closer. As darkness fell, Sarah began her approach. She moved like a ghost through the terrain, using every piece of cover and taking advantage of natural sound masking from wind and wildlife. Each step was calculated to avoid loose rocks and dry vegetation that might create noise. Her movement was so careful that it took 3 hours to cover a distance she could have walked in 30 minutes under normal circumstances. By midnight, she had closed to within 900 yards of the enemy position. This was much closer than she had originally planned, but the terrain features provided an opportunity for a shot that would be both easier and more certain. From this position, she could see the enemy sniper's hide clearly, and had identified the exact spot where she needed to aim. Sarah set up her rifle with methodical precision. She calculated wind speed and direction, estimated the temperature differential between her position and the target area, and adjusted her scope accordingly. The shot would be challenging but well within her capabilities. All she needed was the perfect moment. That moment came at 0347 hours. The enemy sniper had been motionless for nearly an hour, watching the valley below through his scope. His position was perfectly exposed to Sarah's line of sight, and environmental conditions were ideal. She controlled her breathing, took up the slack in her trigger, and fired. The suppressed rifle made only a soft sound, and the muzzle flash was barely visible. At the target location, the enemy sniper slumped forward without a sound. Sarah kept her scope trained on the position for 10 minutes, watching for any sign of movement, but her target was clearly eliminated. 1 down, at least 11 to go. Sarah immediately began planning her movement to the next target area. Intelligence reports indicated another sniper position, approximately 5 miles to the northeast, positioned to cover a different set of approach routes. But moving during daylight would be extremely dangerous, so she would need to find a secure hide site and wait for the next period of darkness. She selected a position in a dry creek bed that offered good concealment and fields of observation. After carefully camouflaging her location, she settled in for a long day of waiting and watching. The second enemy position was much farther away, and she would need to study the terrain carefully before attempting an approach. As the sun rose, Sarah used her spotting scope to examine the distant target area. The second sniper had chosen a position in an old stone building that provided excellent protection while offering good fields of fire. This would be a much more challenging target. The range would be extreme, and the enemy had hard cover that would make a precise shot essential. Throughout the day, Sarah observed the target area and planned her approach route. The enemy sniper was clearly experienced and professional, maintaining excellent camouflage discipline and varying his observation patterns to avoid becoming predictable. But Sarah noticed that he seemed to favor certain observation windows in the building, and those preferences could become vulnerabilities. Radio traffic from her communications equipment indicated that military commanders were beginning to notice changes in enemy sniper activity. The elimination of the first target had apparently disrupted their coordination network, causing the remaining snipers to adjust their positions and tactics. Sarah realized she needed to move faster before the enemy figured out what was happening. As night fell, she began moving toward the second target. The terrain was even more challenging than the previous area, with steep slopes and loose rock that made silent movement extremely difficult. Several times she had to freeze in place as enemy patrols passed nearby, but her camouflage and fieldcraft skills kept her hidden. The approach took most of the night, and she finally reached a suitable firing position just before dawn. The range to the target was now 1,450 yards, a challenging shot under any circumstances, but complicated by the fact that she would need to thread her bullet through a narrow window opening in the stone building. Sarah spent the early morning hours studying the target through her scope, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The enemy sniper appeared periodically at different windows, but never long enough to guarantee a successful shot. She realized she would need to be patient and wait for the right moment, even if it meant spending another full day in position. The opportunity finally came at noon. The enemy sniper positioned himself at the window Sarah had identified as offering the best angle, and he remained there for an extended observation period. The shot would need to be perfect. Any error would alert the enemy to her presence and likely result in her own death. Sarah controlled her breathing and took up the trigger slack slowly. Wind conditions were tricky due to the terrain features between her position and the target, but she had calculated the trajectory carefully. At the moment when conditions were optimal, she fired. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before impacting the target. Through her scope, Sarah saw the enemy sniper collapse backward into the building. Another threat had been eliminated, but she knew that the sound of her shot had likely been heard by other enemies in the area. She immediately began moving to a new position, expecting the area to be crawling with search teams within minutes. But as she moved through the terrain, she realized that the enemy was having trouble pinpointing her location. The sound of her suppressed rifle had echoed off the rocky terrain, making it difficult to determine exactly where the shot had originated. 2 down, approximately 10 to go. Sarah's success was beginning to have a significant impact on enemy operations. Intelligence reports indicated that the remaining snipers were becoming increasingly cautious and changing their positions more frequently. This made them harder to track, but it also reduced their effectiveness against Allied forces. The third target was located in a completely different type of terrain, a dense forest area where concealment was easier, but observation distances were much shorter. This would require a different set of tactics, emphasizing stealth and close-range precision rather than long-distance shooting. As Sarah moved through the forest, she could sense that the enemy was becoming aware of the threat she represented. Patrol activity had increased significantly, and she detected signs that the remaining snipers were coordinating their efforts to hunt her while she hunted them. The forest environment presented unique challenges. Visibility was limited, but so was the enemy's ability to observe her movements. She could move more quickly through the dense vegetation, but she also risked walking into an ambush if she became careless. Sarah located the third enemy position after 2 days of careful searching. The sniper had constructed an elaborate hide in the canopy of a large tree, positioned to overlook a trail that Allied forces had been using for supply runs. The camouflage was excellent, and the position would have been nearly impossible to detect from ground level. But Sarah had learned to think in 3 dimensions, and she suspected that the enemy might be using elevated positions to maximize their advantage. Using her binoculars, she systematically examined every large tree in the area until she spotted the tiny irregularities that revealed the sniper's location. The shot would be extremely challenging. The target was approximately 400 yards away and positioned 40 feet above ground level. Sarah would need to account for the unusual shooting angle while threading her bullet through gaps in the tree branches. Any contact with intervening vegetation would deflect her shot and alert the enemy to her presence. Sarah found a position that offered a clear line of sight to the target and began her preparations. She calculated the ballistic adjustments needed for the upward shooting angle and identified the exact moment when the tree branches would be aligned to allow her bullet to pass through cleanly. The shot came at dawn when the wind was calm and the lighting conditions were optimal. Sarah's bullet passed through 2 narrow gaps between branches and struck the enemy sniper precisely. The target fell from the tree, eliminating another threat to Allied forces. 3 down, but Sarah knew that the remaining enemies were now fully aware of her presence and actively hunting her. The next phase of her mission would be even more dangerous, as she would be facing opponents who were specifically looking for her while trying to eliminate them one by one. Radio communications indicated that Allied forces were finally beginning to make progress in areas that had been controlled by enemy snipers for months. Sarah's work was having the desired strategic impact, but she still had a long way to go before the mission would be complete. As she moved toward the next target area, Sarah realized that the enemy was adapting to her tactics and becoming more unpredictable. The remaining snipers were clearly professionals who understood that they were being hunted by someone with exceptional skills. The psychological pressure was working in both directions. While the enemy was becoming more cautious and less effective, they were also becoming more dangerous and desperate. The real test of Sarah's abilities was yet to come. Sarah Martinez crouched behind a fallen log, her breathing controlled and shallow as she scanned the tree line ahead. 3 days had passed since her last successful elimination, and the enemy had clearly changed their tactics. Instead of maintaining fixed positions, the remaining snipers were now moving constantly, coordinating their efforts to locate and eliminate the threat they knew was hunting them. The forest around her seemed different now. What had once been a natural environment filled with predictable sounds and patterns had become a deadly maze where every shadow could conceal an enemy. Sarah could feel the psychological pressure building as she realized that she was no longer just the hunter. She had become the hunted. Intelligence reports crackled through her encrypted radio, providing updates on enemy movement and patrol patterns. Allied forces had noticed a significant change in sniper activity over the past week. The enemy shooters were abandoning their carefully prepared positions and adopting more aggressive tactics. Several Allied units had reported near misses from sniper fire coming from unexpected directions, suggesting that the remaining enemies were working together to track her movements. Sarah adjusted her position carefully, using the natural cover to mask her movement as she studied the terrain ahead. The fourth target was supposed to be located somewhere in this forest sector, but intelligence was becoming less reliable as the enemy adapted to her presence. She would need to rely more on her own skills and instincts to locate and eliminate the remaining threats. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, followed immediately by the distant sound of movement through heavy brush. Sarah froze completely, controlling every muscle as she listened for additional signs of enemy presence. The sounds were too deliberate to be wildlife. Someone was moving through the forest with military discipline, but not quite enough stealth to avoid detection by someone with her training. Through gaps in the vegetation, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement approximately 200 yards away. A figure in camouflage clothing was moving parallel to her position, clearly searching for signs of her passage. The enemy had deployed ground teams to track her while the remaining snipers took overwatch positions to provide covering fire. This was exactly the type of coordinated response that military tacticians had warned her about. Professional enemy forces would eventually adapt to any threat, no matter how skilled the individual operator might be. Sarah realized that her mission parameters had changed fundamentally. She was no longer conducting a series of separate hunting operations, but rather fighting a multi-dimensional battle against opponents who were specifically focused on killing her. Sarah remained motionless for over an hour, watching as the enemy search team methodically covered the area around her position. They were good, disciplined, thorough, and clearly experienced in tracking operations, but they made small mistakes that revealed their positions and movement patterns to someone who knew what to look for. When the search team finally moved beyond her location, Sarah began planning her next move. The original intelligence about sniper positions was now largely useless, since the enemy was no longer maintaining fixed locations. She would need to use different tactics to locate and engage targets who were actively hunting her while trying to remain hidden themselves. The breakthrough came when Sarah intercepted radio communications between enemy units. Her language training allowed her to understand enough of their tactical communications to realize that they were coordinating a complex operation designed to trap her in a specific area. 3 sniper teams were moving to establish a triangular perimeter, while ground units drove her toward the center of their killing zone. But understanding enemy intentions gave Sarah the advantage she needed. Instead of avoiding the trap, she decided to enter it deliberately, while taking precautions to ensure her own survival. If the enemy snipers were moving to predetermined positions, she could potentially locate and engage them during their movement, rather than after they had established defensive positions. Sarah began moving toward the center of the enemy's intended trap, but she took a route that would allow her to intercept one of the sniper teams during their approach movement. This was extremely dangerous. She would be operating in an area where multiple enemy units were converging, and any mistake could result in being caught in crossfire from multiple directions. The forest terrain provided excellent concealment for her movement, but it also limited her ability to observe approaching enemies until they were dangerously close. Sarah used every technique she had learned for silent movement, placing each step carefully and using natural sound masking to cover any noise she couldn't eliminate completely. After 2 hours of careful movement, Sarah detected the first enemy sniper team moving through the forest ahead of her. 2 shooters were advancing toward their assigned position, communicating through hand signals and maintaining excellent noise discipline. They were clearly professionals who understood the importance of stealth in this type of operation. Sarah positioned herself along their route of movement and waited for the perfect opportunity. The enemy snipers would pass within 150 yards of her position, moving through a small clearing that would provide a brief window for engagement. The shot would need to be quick and precise. Any delay would allow the second sniper to locate and engage her. The first enemy sniper entered the clearing at exactly the time Sarah had predicted. She tracked him through her scope, waiting for the moment when he would be most vulnerable. When he paused to examine something on the ground, Sarah fired immediately. The suppressed rifle made its characteristic soft sound, and the enemy sniper dropped instantly. But the second sniper reacted with impressive speed, diving for cover while attempting to locate the source of the shot. Sarah had anticipated this response and was already moving to a different position when the enemy's return fire began. Bullets cracked through the air where Sarah had been positioned moments earlier. The enemy sniper was firing rapidly but accurately, demonstrating the type of professional skill that had made these opponents so dangerous to conventional forces. Sarah realized that this engagement was far from over. Using the forest terrain for concealment, Sarah began maneuvering to get a clear shot at the second enemy sniper. But her opponent was equally skilled at using cover and concealment, and he was clearly trying to work his way around to a position where he could engage her effectively. What followed was a deadly game of hide-and-seek between 2 expert marksmen in dense forest terrain. The battle lasted for nearly an hour. Both shooters moved carefully through the forest, trying to gain positional advantage while avoiding exposure to enemy fire. Sarah used her superior knowledge of the local terrain to gradually work her way into a position that offered a clear line of sight to the enemy's hiding place. The decisive moment came when the enemy sniper made a small mistake in his camouflage discipline. A slight movement caught Sarah's attention, and she was able to identify his exact position among the trees. The shot was challenging due to intervening vegetation, but Sarah had practiced similar shots extensively during her training. Her bullet found its target, eliminating the second member of the enemy sniper team. But Sarah knew that the extended firefight had revealed her general location to other enemy units in the area. She needed to move immediately to avoid being trapped by converging forces. Radio communications indicated that the enemy was reacting quickly to the loss of the sniper team. Additional units were moving to surround the area, and aerial surveillance was being deployed to locate her position. Sarah realized that her mission was entering a new phase that would require different tactics and much greater caution. 4 down, approximately 8 to go. But the remaining enemies were now fully committed to hunting her, and they had demonstrated their ability to coordinate effective counter-operations. Sarah began moving through the forest toward a predetermined extraction point where she could resupply and receive updated intelligence. But as she moved, she detected signs that the enemy was tracking her movements with increasing accuracy. They were using professional tracking techniques and had apparently brought in specialists who understood how to hunt skilled opponents in forest terrain. The psychological pressure was intense. Sarah had spent years training for individual marksmanship competitions and military sniper operations. But this was different. She was fighting a sustained battle against multiple opponents who were specifically focused on killing her while trying to complete her own mission objectives. Every decision could be her last, and there was no backup available if she made a mistake. As night fell, Sarah reached a rocky area that offered better defensive positions and clearer fields of observation. She established a temporary hide site and began monitoring radio communications to assess enemy activities. What she learned was both encouraging and disturbing. The elimination of 5 enemy snipers had significantly degraded their operational effectiveness. Allied forces were reporting successful movements through areas that had been impassable for months. Supply lines were functioning more efficiently, and several planned operations that had been postponed due to sniper threats were moving forward. Sarah's mission was having the desired strategic impact, But the enemy was adapting rapidly to her presence. Intelligence indicated that additional sniper teams were being deployed to the area, and enemy commanders were implementing new tactics specifically designed to counter a single skilled operator. They were learning from each engagement and adjusting their methods accordingly. Sarah realized that she would need to change her own approach to maintain the initiative. The enemy was expecting her to continue using the same hunting tactics that had been successful initially, but adaptation was a two-way process. She began planning modifications to her techniques that would allow her to continue eliminating targets, while avoiding the increasingly sophisticated countermeasures being deployed against her. The next target area was located in mountainous terrain that offered different challenges and opportunities. The enemy would be expecting her to continue operating in forested areas, so moving to completely different terrain might provide the element of surprise she needed to regain the tactical advantage. But first, she needed to rest and resupply. The constant stress of being hunted while conducting her own hunting operations was taking a physical and mental toll that could affect her performance. Sarah found a secure position among the rocks and settled in for a few hours of much-needed rest. As she maintained watch through the night, Sarah reflected on the progress of her mission. She had eliminated 5 enemy snipers and was having a measurable impact on the tactical situation. But the most dangerous part of her mission still lay ahead. The remaining enemies were now fully alert, actively hunting her, and implementing sophisticated counter-tactics. The psychological battle was becoming as important as the physical one. Sarah needed to maintain her confidence and focus while operating under extreme pressure. The enemy was trying to wear her down through constant threat and uncertainty, hoping that stress and fatigue would eventually cause her to make a fatal mistake. But Sarah had been prepared for this type of psychological warfare during her training. She used mental techniques to compartmentalize the stress and maintain focus on immediate tactical requirements. Each successful engagement reinforced her confidence, while each narrow escape reminded her of the importance of constant vigilance. Dawn brought new challenges as enemy aircraft began systematic searches of the area. Sarah had to remain completely concealed, while hostile helicopters flew search patterns overhead. The enemy was clearly committed to locating and eliminating her, regardless of the resources required. But Sarah Martinez had not come this far to be defeated by increased enemy pressure. She had a job to do, and she intended to complete it successfully. The remaining enemy snipers represented a continued threat to Allied forces, and eliminating them remained her primary responsibility. As the aircraft moved away from her position, Sarah began planning her next phase of operations. The hunt would continue, but now it would be conducted on her terms, rather than the enemy's. She had learned valuable lessons about their tactics and capabilities, and she intended to use that knowledge to maintain the initiative in this deadly game. The war was far from over, but Sarah was determined to be the last sniper standing when it ended. The mountain air was thin and cold as Sarah Martinez climbed toward her new operational area. 2 weeks had passed since her last engagement, and she had used that time to completely change her approach to the mission. Instead of reacting to enemy movements, she was now setting traps of her own. Intelligence reports had provided valuable information about the remaining enemy snipers' new tactics. They were operating in teams of 2 or 3, constantly moving between prepared positions, and using sophisticated communication equipment to coordinate their activities. But their increased caution had also made them more predictable in some ways. Sarah had spent days studying their movement patterns and had identified several locations where enemy teams regularly established temporary positions. Rather than hunting moving targets, she decided to set ambushes at places where she could predict enemy presence with reasonable certainty. The rocky, mountainous terrain offered excellent opportunities for this type of operation. Natural choke points and observation positions were limited, forcing enemy movements into predictable patterns. Sarah could establish concealed positions overlooking these areas and wait for targets to appear. Her first ambush site was positioned to cover a narrow pass between 2 mountain ridges. Intelligence indicated that enemy sniper teams used this route regularly when moving between operational sectors. Sarah arrived 3 days early and carefully prepared a hide position that offered excellent concealment while providing clear fields of fire across the entire pass. The waiting required exceptional patience and discipline. Sarah remained in position for 60 hours, maintaining constant vigilance while conserving her energy and managing her supplies carefully. She had learned to enter a state of relaxed alertness that allowed her to remain motionless for extended periods, while staying ready to react instantly to any opportunity. On the morning of the fourth day, her patience was rewarded. 2 enemy snipers appeared at the entrance to the pass, moving carefully but following the exact route that Sarah had predicted. They were clearly professionals, maintaining proper spacing and using good tactical movement techniques. But they had no idea that they were walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Sarah tracked the lead sniper through her scope as he moved across the pass. The range was 800 yards, a comfortable shooting distance under these conditions. She waited until both targets were clearly visible and positioned where a follow-up shot would be possible before taking action. Her first shot eliminated the lead sniper instantly. The second enemy immediately dove for cover behind a large boulder, but Sarah had anticipated this reaction and adjusted her position to maintain sightlines on likely hiding spots. When the enemy sniper attempted to move to a different position, Sarah's second shot ended the engagement. 2 more down. The psychological impact on the remaining enemies would be significant. They were now facing an opponent who could predict their movements and set traps in areas they had considered safe. Sarah immediately relocated to a different ambush site, knowing that the enemy would quickly discover the elimination of their team and begin searching the area. Her next position was located on a different mountain entirely, positioned to cover another route that intelligence indicated was frequently used by enemy forces. But the enemy response was faster and more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. Within hours of the engagement in the pass, enemy forces began systematic searches of all potential ambush sites in the area. They had learned from previous encounters and were now treating Sarah as a strategic threat rather than a tactical problem. Helicopter-borne search teams began methodically examining every possible hide site within range of the engagement area. Ground teams moved through the mountains using tracking dogs and electronic surveillance equipment. The enemy was clearly committed to locating and eliminating her, regardless of the resources required. Sarah observed this activity from her new position and realized that her tactics would need to evolve again. The enemy was adapting to her ambush strategy just as they had adapted to her original hunting approach, but their increased activity also created new opportunities for someone who could think creatively about the tactical situation. The breakthrough came when Sarah intercepted radio communications, indicating that enemy commanders were establishing a forward command post to coordinate the search operations. The command post was located in a stone building on a ridgeline approximately 12 miles from her current position, and it was reportedly protected by several sniper teams providing overwatch. Sarah realized that the command post represented both a valuable target and an opportunity to eliminate multiple enemies in a single operation. But attacking a defended position would require different tactics than anything she had attempted so far. She would need to approach undetected, eliminate the security teams, and neutralize the command post before enemy reinforcements could respond. The approach to the target area took 2 days of careful movement through extremely challenging terrain. Sarah used natural features to avoid detection by aerial surveillance while navigating around known enemy patrol routes. The physical demands were enormous. She was carrying full equipment loads through mountainous terrain while maintaining the stealth necessary to avoid detection. As she neared the target area, Sarah began detailed reconnaissance of the enemy position. The command post was well positioned and professionally defended. 3 sniper teams were providing overwatch from elevated positions, and ground security teams were conducting regular patrols around the perimeter. Any conventional assault would face overwhelming firepower from multiple directions. But Sarah had noticed something that the enemy defenders might have overlooked. The stone building housing the command post was positioned on a ridgeline that could be approached from the rear through a series of rocky ravines. The approach would be extremely difficult and would require climbing skills in addition to tactical expertise. But it might allow her to reach an attack position without being detected by the overwatch teams. Sarah spent an entire day studying the enemy positions and planning her approach route. She identified the exact timing that would be required to move through each phase of the approach without being observed by the rotating security patrols. The window of opportunity would be narrow, but the potential payoff was enormous. The infiltration began at midnight, under overcast skies that provided excellent concealment from aerial surveillance. Sarah moved through the ravines like a ghost, using her climbing skills to navigate terrain that the enemy had probably dismissed as impassable. Every movement was calculated to avoid creating noise or visual signatures that might alert the security teams. After 4 hours of climbing and crawling, Sarah reached a position approximately 400 yards from the command post. From this location, she could observe the building and all 3 overwatch positions through her scope. More importantly, she had identified a sequence of shots that would allow her to eliminate all the security teams before they could respond effectively. The attack began at dawn, when lighting conditions were optimal for precision shooting. Sarah's first shot eliminated the sniper team positioned on the eastern ridge. Her second shot, fired immediately after repositioning, took out the team on the western position. The third sniper team, alerted by the sudden loss of communication with the other positions, began searching for the source of the attack, just as Sarah's third shot ended their involvement in the battle. With the overwatch positions eliminated, Sarah turned her attention to the command post itself. Through the building's windows, she could see several enemy personnel attempting to coordinate a response to the attack on their security teams. Her next 3 shots eliminated the command personnel, effectively ending organized enemy resistance in the immediate area. But Sarah knew that enemy reinforcements would arrive quickly once the loss of communication with the command post was detected. She needed to gather intelligence from the position and extract before being trapped by superior numbers. Moving rapidly down the ravine system, Sarah approached the command post building from the blind side. The interior contained valuable intelligence materials, including maps showing the positions of remaining sniper teams and communication equipment that provided access to enemy tactical frequencies. Sarah quickly photographed the intelligence materials and gathered electronic equipment that could be analyzed by military specialists. But as she prepared to leave the area, she detected the sound of approaching helicopters bringing enemy reinforcements to the site. The extraction required every skill that Sarah had developed during years of training and combat experience. She used the rocky terrain to mask her movement while enemy forces landed near the command post and began searching for whoever had conducted the attack. Her route took her through areas where helicopters couldn't land and ground forces would have difficulty maneuvering. 3 hours later, Sarah reached a secure position from which she could observe the enemy response to her attack. The command post area was crawling with searchers, but they were clearly having trouble determining exactly what had happened. The rapid sequence of precise shots had eliminated all witnesses, leaving the enemy without clear information about the nature of the attack. Radio communications indicated that the loss of the command post and multiple sniper teams had created significant confusion in enemy tactical operations. Remaining units were being recalled to defensive positions, and planned operations against Allied forces were being postponed indefinitely. Sarah had eliminated at least 6 more enemy personnel and captured valuable intelligence that would help Allied forces plan future operations. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that the enemy's defensive positions were not safe from attack. The psychological impact would be significant. Remaining enemy forces would now question the security of any position, no matter how well defended it appeared to be. The intelligence materials revealed the approximate locations of the remaining enemy sniper teams. Only 3 teams were still operational, and they were clearly struggling to maintain effective coordination without their command structure. Sarah began planning operations to eliminate these final threats and complete her mission. But she also realized that the enemy would be expecting her to target the remaining known positions. They had learned from previous encounters and would likely abandon their current locations in favor of new positions that couldn't be predicted from captured intelligence. Sarah decided to use the enemy's caution against them. Instead of immediately pursuing the remaining teams, she would establish surveillance positions overlooking likely extraction routes and supply points. Enemy forces would eventually need to resupply or communicate with their higher headquarters, and those activities would create opportunities for engagement. The final phase of her mission would require patience and careful observation, but Sarah had demonstrated her ability to adapt to changing tactical situations. She had evolved from a hunter targeting individual enemies to a strategic threat capable of disrupting entire enemy operations. As she established her next surveillance position, Sarah reflected on the progress of her mission. She had eliminated at least 11 enemy snipers and degraded enemy capabilities to the point where Allied forces were reporting significant improvements in tactical mobility and operational effectiveness. But the mission was not yet complete. 3 enemy sniper teams remained active, and they represented a continuing threat to Allied personnel. Sarah was determined to eliminate every remaining threat before considering her mission accomplished. The enemy had learned to fear her presence, but they had not yet learned to escape it. Sarah Martinez intended to finish what she had started, regardless of how long it might take or how dangerous the final engagements might prove to be. The hunt would continue until every threat was eliminated and Allied forces could operate freely in areas that had been dominated by enemy snipers for months. Sarah had the skills, equipment, and determination necessary to complete this mission successfully, and she had no intention of stopping until the job was done. Sarah Martinez lay motionless on the rocky ridge, her rifle trained on the valley below as the first light of dawn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. 28 days had passed since her mission began, and intelligence reports confirmed that only 2 enemy sniper teams remained operational in the entire region. The elimination of the command post had triggered exactly the response Sarah had predicted. The remaining enemy forces had abandoned their known positions and were operating with extreme caution, making them harder to locate, but also far less effective against Allied operations. Supply convoys were moving freely through routes that had been impassable for months, and planned military operations were proceeding ahead of schedule. But Sarah's mission wouldn't be complete until every threat was eliminated. The final 2 enemy teams represented the most dangerous opponents she had faced. They were the survivors who had learned from the fate of their colleagues and adapted their tactics accordingly. They knew they were being hunted by someone with exceptional skills, and they were taking extraordinary precautions to avoid detection. Sarah had been tracking one of the remaining teams for 6 days, following subtle signs of their passage through terrain that most people would consider trackless. A disturbed stone here, a bent branch there, the faint outline of a boot print in soft earth. The enemy was skilled, but no one could move through wilderness without leaving some trace of their passage. The tracking had led her to this observation position overlooking a valley that contained several water sources and natural shelter sites. Intelligence analysis suggested that enemy forces would eventually need to access this area for resupply and rest, making it an ideal location for surveillance operations. Through her scope, Sarah systematically examined every possible hiding spot in the valley below. The enemy snipers would choose positions that offered good observation while remaining concealed from aerial surveillance. They would avoid obvious locations while selecting sites that provided multiple escape routes and good fields of fire. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Sarah detected the first sign of enemy presence. A flock of birds suddenly took flight from a grove of trees near the valley floor, suggesting that something had disturbed them. Sarah focused her attention on that area and began looking for additional indicators of human activity. The confirmation came 2 hours later when she spotted movement among the trees. Someone was moving through the grove with military discipline, pausing periodically to observe the surrounding area before continuing. The movement pattern suggested a reconnaissance team checking potential positions before establishing a more permanent hide site. Sarah tracked the movement carefully, noting the route being used and the areas that received the most attention from the reconnaissance team. Based on their behavior, she could predict where they would likely establish their operational position. The enemy was following professional procedures, but those same procedures made their intentions predictable to someone who understood their methods. By evening, the enemy team had selected a position in a cluster of large boulders that offered excellent concealment while providing good observation of the surrounding valley. Sarah watched them establish their hide site with professional competence. They were clearly experienced operators who understood the importance of proper camouflage and site security. But their position had one critical weakness that they had apparently overlooked. The boulder cluster was positioned perfectly for observing the valley floor and the main approach routes. But it was vulnerable to observation from the elevated ridge where Sarah was positioned. From her location, she could see directly into their position when lighting conditions were right. Sarah spent that night planning her engagement. The range to the enemy position was 1,200 yards. A challenging shot, but well within her capabilities under optimal conditions. The main difficulty would be timing the shot to catch both enemy snipers when they were visible and vulnerable. Professional sniper teams maintained strict discipline about exposure, with team members taking turns at observation while others remained concealed. Sarah would need to wait for the moment when both enemies were positioned where she could engage them in rapid succession before either could take effective cover. The opportunity came on the following morning, when lighting conditions were perfect and wind speed was minimal. Both enemy snipers moved into observation positions to conduct their morning surveillance of the valley. For approximately 90 seconds, both targets were clearly visible through Sarah's scope. Sarah controlled her breathing and took up the trigger slack on her rifle. The first shot would need to be perfect. Any error would alert the second sniper and likely result in a prolonged firefight under disadvantageous conditions. At the moment when all factors were optimal, Sarah fired. Her bullet struck the first enemy sniper precisely, eliminating him instantly. The second sniper immediately began moving toward cover, but Sarah had anticipated this reaction and was already tracking him through her scope. Her second shot caught him before he could reach safety, ending the engagement. 11 down, 1 team to go. But Sarah realized that the final enemy team would present the greatest challenge of her entire mission. They would know by now that all their colleagues had been eliminated by a single opponent with extraordinary skills. They would be operating with maximum caution and using every technique they knew to avoid detection and engagement. Intelligence reports confirmed Sarah's assessment. Radio intercepts indicated that the final enemy team was requesting extraction from the operational area. They had apparently concluded that continuing their mission was hopeless and were attempting to withdraw to friendly territory before they shared the fate of their comrades. Sarah faced a difficult decision. She could establish surveillance positions along likely extraction routes and attempt to intercept the enemy team during their withdrawal. But extraction routes were numerous and difficult to predict, making this a low-probability approach that could easily fail. Alternatively, she could force the enemy team to reveal their position by creating a situation that required them to respond. This approach would be much more dangerous, as it would involve exposing herself to enemy observation. But it offered a higher probability of success. Sarah chose the aggressive approach. Using intelligence gathered from the captured command post, she began moving toward a supply cache that the final enemy team would likely need to access before attempting extraction. If she could reach the cache first, she could establish an ambush position and force the enemies to come to her. The movement to the supply cache took 2 days through extremely difficult terrain. Sarah had to avoid several enemy surveillance positions while carrying full equipment loads across mountainous country. The physical demands were enormous, but she knew that this represented her best opportunity to locate and eliminate the final threats. The supply cache was located in a natural cave system that provided excellent concealment from aerial surveillance. Sarah arrived first and began preparing defensive positions that would allow her to control access to the cache while providing good fields of fire against approaching enemies. But as she established her positions, Sarah realized that the final enemy team was more skilled than she had anticipated. They had apparently detected signs of her presence and were conducting counter-surveillance operations to locate her exact position before attempting to access the supply cache. What followed was a 3-day battle of wits between Sarah and 2 enemy snipers, who understood that their survival depended on eliminating her before she could engage them. Both sides used every technique they knew for remaining concealed while trying to locate their opponents. The enemy team attempted several approaches to the cache area, but Sarah's defensive positions allowed her to detect their movements without being observed herself. Each time the enemies tried to close on her position, they were forced to withdraw when they realized they were being observed. On the 4th day, the stalemate was broken when one of the enemy snipers made a critical error in his camouflage discipline. Sarah detected a brief reflection from his rifle scope and was able to determine his approximate position among the rocks overlooking the cave entrance. Using her knowledge of the terrain, Sarah began maneuvering to get a clear shot at the enemy position. The movement required 3 hours of careful crawling through rocky terrain while remaining invisible to enemy observation. But eventually, Sarah reached a position that offered a clear line of sight to the enemy sniper's hide site. The shot was one of the most challenging Sarah had attempted during her entire mission. The target was partially concealed among the rocks at a range of 900 yards, and she would have only a brief opportunity to engage before the enemy could relocate to a different position. Sarah waited for the perfect moment when lighting and wind conditions were optimal. When the enemy sniper moved slightly to adjust his observation angle, Sarah fired immediately. Her bullet found its target, eliminating the penultimate threat to Allied forces in the region. But the elimination of his partner triggered an immediate response from the final enemy sniper. Sarah found herself under accurate fire from a hidden position that she couldn't locate. Bullets cracked through the air around her position, forcing her to take cover while the enemy attempted to maneuver for a killing shot. The final engagement lasted for 2 hours, as both snipers used every skill they possessed to gain advantage over their opponent. Sarah used the rocky terrain to mask her movements while trying to locate the enemy's position. Her opponent was equally skilled at using concealment and was clearly determined to kill the person who had eliminated his entire unit. The decisive moment came when Sarah noticed that the enemy's shooting pattern revealed information about his position. His shots were coming from slightly different angles, suggesting that he was moving between several prepared positions in a small area. Sarah was able to predict where he would appear next and position herself accordingly. When the enemy sniper moved to his final position, Sarah was ready. Her shot ended the engagement and completed her mission. Every enemy sniper who had been terrorizing Allied forces for months had been eliminated by a single operator in less than 30 days. Radio communications with headquarters confirmed what Sarah already knew. Allied forces were reporting dramatic improvements in tactical mobility throughout the region. Supply lines were functioning normally, planned operations were proceeding without sniper interference, and areas that had been considered too dangerous for routine operations were now accessible to friendly forces. Sarah's extraction from the operational area took place 2 days later, as the helicopter carried her away from the mountains where she had spent the most challenging month of her military career. She reflected on the lessons learned during the mission. She had proven that exceptional individual skill could have strategic impact when applied with intelligence and determination. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that no enemy, regardless of their apparent invincibility, was immune to defeat by someone with superior training, better tactics, and unwavering commitment to mission completion. The debriefing at Fort Braxton revealed the full scope of what Sarah had accomplished. 12 enemy sniper teams, totaling 24 highly trained personnel, had been eliminated during her solo operation. Intelligence gathered during the mission had provided valuable insights into enemy training methods, equipment capabilities, and tactical procedures that would benefit future operations. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah's success had broken the psychological dominance that enemy snipers had exercised over Allied forces. Troops who had been afraid to move in daylight were now conducting normal operations throughout the region. The fear that had paralyzed military units for months had been replaced by confidence that any threat could be defeated with proper planning and execution. Colonel Williams summed up the mission's impact during Sarah's final debriefing. "Martinez, what you accomplished out there goes far beyond eliminating enemy personnel. You proved that individual excellence can overcome any obstacle when combined with professional competence and absolute determination." Sarah Martinez had entered hostile territory as a skilled sniper with a dangerous mission. She emerged as a legend whose accomplishments would be studied and discussed for generations. She had faced the best enemy marksmen in the world and defeated every one of them through superior skill, tactical intelligence, and unwavering courage. The mission was complete, but Sarah knew that her real work was just beginning. She would use her experience to train the next generation of military snipers, ensuring that future operations would benefit from the lessons learned during her extraordinary solo campaign against impossible odds. They had believed no one could defeat those enemy marksmen. Sarah Martinez had proven them wrong in the most decisive way possible.